Following is an AZPM original production.
Hello and welcome to this latest edition of The Press Room from the AZPM radio studios. I'm your host, Steve Goldstein. A lot of things to discuss this week, including President Obama visiting the University of Arizona campus on Friday afternoon. But first, let me introduce our distinguished panel of guests: Irene McKisson of AZLuminaria, Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, Alisa Reznick of KJZZ, and Steve Jess of AZPM. Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate it. Irene, I'm going to come to you first in a moment because a bizarre situation happened earlier this week where the Pima County Sheriff, about 10 days or so after early ballots had already gone out, decided to suspend with pay his opponent, who also works in the Pima County Sheriff's Department, Heather Lappin. And then, to top that off, your publication, AZLuminaria, got sort of dragged in because of some reporting one of your reporters, John Washington, who's been on this program, had done. Can you unwrap this for us a little bit?
Yeah, I can try to unwrap it as far as we know what's happened. So Lappin was put on leave, as well as another deputy, Aaron Cross, was also put on leave, ostensibly because he was out demonstrating against Nanos. And in the course of the sheriff communicating about why he had put his opponent on leave, he said that it was because of evidence that Lappin had been colluding with a journalist to get an interview, and mentioned that it was that the journalist was paying for the interview, which immediately sent up red flags for us because we don't pay for journalism, we don't pay for interviews, we don't pay for sources, and so we knew this to be a case where our reporter John, who has been doing jail reporting for 3 years on issues inside the jail, which is led by Nanos. In order to get interviews with people in the jail, sometimes we have to pay for stamps or pay for phone calls to try to facilitate the person inside being able to communicate with us, which is incredibly important for us as journalists ethically, because we can't just rely on records and we can't just rely on officials. We really want to hear from the people who are most affected by issues in the jail, what's happening to them. And so this was a case of that where John had, AZLuminaria had reimbursed.
And how much money are we talking about?
$20.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we never want to be the center of a story, and it's standard for a news organization to help facilitate through stamps or phone calls, communication with an inmate, but it is not standard for a candidate to put their opponent on leave in the middle of an election, and there's only 19 days left. People are already voting. But
Tim, Sheriff Nanos has had issues with opponents in the past, though?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So explain that.
Critics, opponents. So back in 2016, when Sheriff Nanos had been appointed and was running for re-election, or running for election for the first time, a sergeant in the department, Terry Staton, filed papers to run for election, and a few days later, Nanos suspended him, citing county rules that existed at the time but no longer exist, which recommend that people be suspended from their jobs in the department if their campaign is going to interfere with the operation of the sheriff's department. So yeah, that happened before, but also other things. I mean, there was a bullying incident against someone who was a persistent critic of his back in 2016, which the Pima County HR department sustained. And there's been a lot of stuff going on.
Well, and Steve, we want to get into the election stuff in just a moment or so, but I want to go back to the whole timing of this. The idea that it is after early voting's already happened. And I get the impression that Sheriff Nanos has some explanation for the timing, although to those of us who are watching from afar, it doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. What do you, as a longtime political observer, make about this?
I question the timing of it, of course. I also wonder, the tinfoil hat side of me wonders if Heather Lappin's side didn't think this up. I mean, I have to imagine them sitting around a table and saying, what would really be fun? Let's poke the bear. Let's do something to provoke him and let the people see what he's really like. If you think of how Kamala Harris is going around the country and repeatedly pushing Donald Trump's buttons every time she gets in front of a microphone.
Sheriff Nanos is not going to like that comparison, I don't think.
I'm sure he won't, but nevertheless, it's what's happening. And in a sense, Lappin's people accidentally or intentionally managed to do this and trigger Chris Nanos to do something that is very Chris Nanos.
Mm-hmm. Alisa Reznick, without putting you on the spot, you are not going to take part actively in this conversation. Can you give our viewers and listeners a quick explanation as to why?
Sure. Well, about a year ago, almost a year ago, I was arrested by the Pima County Sheriff's Department while covering a protest. So just to avoid any conflict of interest issues, I'll just kind of stay out of this one.
Okay. Well, then, Tim, that sort of comes back to Nanos does not have very thick skin, it appears.
Right. Yeah. This is a pattern. I wrote a column about it a few weeks ago before all this even started. That is that he tends to lash out at critics or opponents. And, for me, it's a bit of a disturbing pattern. The journalism angle here, meaning Alisa got arrested. Yes, the charges were then dropped a few weeks later by the county attorney's office. The sheriff's department did defend arresting her. And then here we have a situation where, well, the timeline is, they suspended her for, I don't think we've said this, that there were some people, deputies who demonstrated by the side of a couple busy roads against Nanos holding signs. They were dressed in clothes that looked like sheriff's department uniforms, but were not. There was some confusion in the public about whether they were uniformed or not. I know that from talking to people I know who saw them. And so that's what gave the sheriff's department the justification for going after Lappin, who's someone posted a photo of this on her Facebook page. And then he got the phone, so he had them turn in their badges, guns, and phones, and then they were able to go look for, in my opinion, go on a fishing expedition and find something to suspend her for.
Yeah, Irene, one of the concerns people always have is a chilling effect on what journalists can do. How does this affect Luminaria? How does this affect John Washington covering the jails going forward?
John Washington is going to continue covering the jails in the way he has been for 2 or 3 years. I mean, he has stories in the works, clearly, as evidenced by these messages. But he's been doing jail stories since 2022. It's a really deep story about conditions inside the jail, about the number of deaths being a much higher rate than in other places in the country. And in fact, since he's been doing his reporting, there hasn't been a death in the jail in about 13 months now. Yeah. And so part of his work is to keep an eye on it and let people know if that changes and to kind of tell the story of what it's like to be in the jail and kind of all of the pieces that have led to the issues there. And all of this is really, really important for voters right now, right? The way in which voters can have a say in the state of the jail and the way that people are treated there is through their elected officials. Mm-hmm. Number one, through the sheriff, and then through the Board of Supervisors. And so this is incredibly relevant, the jail coverage, and the chilling effect was one of our number one concerns.
Yeah,
so.
Steve, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, I mean, obviously we've talked about, all of us as journalists, the different offices. Should these be elected offices? Should they be appointed? Should they be based on merit, whatever it is? But the fact is he's a politician, and one would think that he has political advisors, and he's a Democrat in a Democratic county.
Yeah.
Wrap all this up.
He should have an easy skate to re-election if he keeps his head down and appears to be doing his job. Somehow, for whatever reason, he doesn't find it very easy to do that. And one of the things I was going to bring up is the fact that when he issued a news release about this whole thing, he cast the fact that AZLuminaria reimbursed a prisoner for the cost of a phone call. And as I understand it, it was just a straight across cost of the phone call. And he cast it as the news outlet colluding with an inmate, whereas it's just a simple reimbursement. First of all, I think I missed the memo when Chris Nanos was appointed the arbiter of journalistic ethics in Pima County. And second, this is a very anti-First Amendment thing to do, to hold journalists to a different standard than just an ordinary citizen. We were discussing before the show how if an inmate needs to do a media interview, the rules call for the jail to be notified in advance. Well, why can an inmate talk on the phone with their Aunt Martha without having to notify the jail staff in advance, but not a reporter? Mm-hmm. That is a First Amendment issue. Mm-hmm. And I think it needs to be addressed. I don't know if that rule began with Chris Nanos, but it needs to be examined, and I think it needs to be clarified a little bit.
That's an interesting point. Tim, I want to ask you about the Pima County supervisors had already, by a slight majority, 3-2, had been questioning Sheriff Nanos's sexual assault investigation, and they had wanted more answers from him, and he had said, not going to talk to you again until after the election. Yeah. Any comments from the supervisors so far about this?
Boy, he already had weak support among Democrats, in other words, no support except for one, Rex Scott. And then I was talking to him, Rex Scott, before all this happened. And when after he had read all the stories, his support was shaken. And these are Democrats, you know, and so Steve Christie, the Republican, opposes Nanos for sure. Matt Hines, one Democrat, actively opposes Nanos. The others are either completely neutral or barely supporting.
Okay. Steve, let's talk about the actual November 5th potential for results here. Do you see this particular incident, as we're talking about it, it's been reported, hurting Nanos' re-election bid?
I think he's a Democrat running in a highly Democratic part of Arizona, and the default result to expect would be that he'd be reelected. But I think of all the Democrats on the ballot in this county, he is probably the one at most peril, just because of the bad publicity and bad news coverage that he's gotten over the last few days. And yes, voting has begun, although ballots were delayed a little bit, and we might talk about that later. Voting has begun, although I think the bulk of the voting has still to occur in Pima County. So a lot of people are going to see Chris Nanos, and they're going to pause over that name and, hesitate a bit about filling in that bubble when his name has been attached to negative coverage for the last several days.
Irene, weigh in on that?
I mean, not just the last several days either. I think, Democrats in particular, their platforms align with a lot of the things in the jail that have been happening under Chris Nanos. And so I think there's been a lot of questioning of the Democrat running the jail. And I think the question is really, is it fair for one person running to put their opponent on leave? I think coming back to that, because that feels like the issue here. And she has said that she's under a gag order and can't talk, and has said that she has to stay home and can't campaign. And so really has put made it very difficult for his opponent to do anything. I think that's the real issue.
She's effectively under house arrest, from what I understand.
Yeah. One would think that would make voters shake their heads a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say he has going for him here is that Donald Trump will be at the top of the ballot. A lot of Democrats will be anxiously, aggressively voting, filling in that circle for Kamala Harris, and so going down, they'll tend to vote Democratic, but this will affect it.
All right, last thing on this topic very quickly, Tim. Let me start with you on this. So, if Nanos wins re-election, I imagine that means, okay, the voters liked me enough, then they didn't care about AZLuminaria. They don't care about the jails.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a wild ride if that happens, because it's not just that, it's also the relationship with the supervisors, which is, there's so many issues to be hashed out, and I don't know how it's going to happen.
Okay.
And it raises the question, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, how many of us will be on the list who can't talk about Chris Nanos for one reason or another?
Right.
And what does that say in a democracy?
Yeah. Final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the coverage is so important, and that point is really the most important one, is that it is incredibly important that people understand what's happening with the sheriff, with the board of supervisors, and with the jail, because those are all public institutions. So anything that makes it difficult for people to understand what's happening is an issue. And if Nanos is reelected, we're just going to continue to talk to those incarcerated people and do the work.
So rarely on any program would former President Obama's visit to Tucson take distant second place, but Alisa Reznick, I'm going to turn to you on this. So we've seen surrogates. Former President Trump himself came, vice presidential nominees Walz and Vance have visited Tucson. But obviously we're recording this before President Obama's arrival in Tucson, but how significant is it that former President Obama, maybe the greatest orator of his generation and a very popular president when he was in office, is in Tucson at the U of A for Kamala Harris's chances?
I mean, I think Tucson is certainly seeing a lot of political play this election season, maybe even more so than we've seen in the past. So, as you mentioned, Vance has been here, Walz has been here a couple of times, and Kamala Harris was at the border not too long ago in Douglas. So I think, this is part of the course for what we've seen so far in Tucson, but it's certainly significant because Obama is such a figure. I think it'll be interesting to see how young people are responding to Obama here on campus because, I think Gen Z and millennials are representing a major voting bloc nationwide in this election. And, we are kind of asking the perennial question, like, how are these voters going to weigh into the overall election? What are their thoughts on things like immigration, climate change? Especially immigration, when there's so much rhetoric going on, especially in these campaigns. It's going to be interesting to see how young people respond to a figure like Obama. Maybe they, either voted for him or were too young to vote for him, and are kind of, it'll be interesting to see how people respond.
And what you're saying rings especially true because he's actually on campus.
Yeah.
So one would think that's going to inspire some of these young voters.
Sure. Yeah. I think, like I said, we just keep on asking those questions, like how are young people going to factor in? It's kind of a perennial question, but it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of excitement or heard a lot of excitement about his visit, but in my experience, and I have kids in the 20, first time voting age range, my experience is that it's our age range of people that's excited about Obama. They're snapping up tickets and viewing it as kind of a last chance to see him. All right.
I was about to say some of the younger students on the U of A campus are going to look at Barack Obama and turn to their friends and say, "Who is this guy again?" Because they were literally in elementary school when he left the White House. But I think Obama's job here is twofold: one, to push turnout among Democrats who are in love with Kamala Harris, but aren't quite sure if they're ready to vote or whatever. He's going to get going, go to the polls. And the other, which is the role of any Kamala Harris surrogate, is to draw that sharp line between Harris and Trump. How many ex-Republican presidents, well, there's only one left, really, but how many ex-Republican officials are on the stump for Donald Trump? Practically nobody. George W. Bush, no, he hasn't taken a position. Mike Pence, oh, hell no. Anybody from Trump's cabinet, no. There are very few of the traditional Republicans who will speak up about voting for Donald Trump, not from the institutional Republicans who outlived his administration.
But I mean, specifically with Arizona being a, quote, battleground state, right. I'm not necessarily sure that matters or not, as far as since Trump himself did come.
Trump was here, Vance was here. We've also, on the Democratic side, had Walz and Emhoff in addition to Obama today. Clinton is up in Mesa. Harris was in Douglas, although I'm interested to see if she comes to Tucson. It seems like right now she's really focused on Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, and is sending her surrogates down here to a blue county, right? So it is really a get out the vote, get all the Democrats out and get them to vote. Although there was a lot of support when Trump was here. That's 2,000 people came to his rally, another 500 out at Vance. So I think that's interesting as well.
I think the role of surrogates, especially with somebody like Donald Trump, is it helps convince those who are a little iffy on Trump himself, but they'll say, well, if this guy thinks Trump is a good candidate for president, maybe I can go along with that. And he's not getting that kind of uplift from other surrogates around the Republican environment.
Well, Alisa, as the youngest person on the panel, what do you make of what Tim said about it's folks of his age and my age that are more excited about Obama?
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I think Obama is the architect of some really important policies for young people or young immigrants. You know, DACA was a major policy that we're still talking about today. It certainly was under fire under the Trump administration. And, you know, while it was always meant to be sort of a temporary Band-Aid, we are still talking about it. We still don't have any sort of legislative solution that might make something more permanent for folks who benefited from DACA. But I think people, you know, I'm a millennial. And so people, I think within my age range, think of that when they think of Obama, potentially, if they know people who are DACA recipients or part of the mixed immigration status families. Or, you know, maybe there's young people who are children of DACA recipients that might see Obama in that light. But, you know, I think...
Has Vice President Harris talked enough about that issue for folks who do care about it? There's been so much immigration, border security sort of melded together into this one big mass. And yet, Dreamers, DACA, that would seem to be... I mean, we even saw Republicans before former President Trump would weigh in saying, sure, I'd like to give DACA recipients a path to citizenship.
Yeah, it's been almost talked about zero this election season. And I think... you know, it's a perennial issue. In fact, the Keeping Families Together program, which is the undocumented spouses program, that's under a lawsuit by Texas and other GOP-led states, and that's actually going to a hearing for the first time on Election Day.
Oh, wow.
So it's just there's so much kind of swirling around the immigration space that we don't talk about because we're constantly talking about border security and kind of melding that with the overall immigration conversation. I think that Kamala Harris's campaign has focused almost exclusively on the bipartisan Senate bill that failed earlier this year, and that is pretty border security heavy. It does include more asylum officers and things like that, but in terms of these longer standing sort of slow burn policies like DACA, we really have not heard much. I mean, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we haven't heard anything about that from the Harris campaign.
It's like she's trying to protect her right flank or gain people, voters who are to the right of her, while kind of ignoring or at least hoping to bring along those who are to the left of her on immigration. And I don't know, that's a vulnerability in my opinion.
So Irene, I'm going to weigh in with a sort of poli-sci question that racks my brain all the time, which is talk about surrogates, former Presidents Obama and Clinton. I mean, these are big folks to come in. And yet I always wonder whether that weighs any differently than when folks hear an endorsement. It's like, oh, so-and-so endorsed this person. Well, I mean, I'm not really sure that influences me either way. Maybe I was going to vote for this person anyway. So as far as actually any movement of the needle, former President Obama being here, what do you think?
I think it's only about getting out the vote. It's reminding people that they need to go turn in their ballot and getting them excited to turn in their ballot. You know, with the election cycle we've had, where it was Biden and then it was Kamala Harris, and then, you know, they've had to do a lot of work to get the Democrats excited because there were so many unknowns there for a while. And so I think a lot of this is just that, is go out, get your ballot turned in.
Okay. Steve, final thoughts on that?
What she said, it's about turnout at this point. I think everybody's pretty much made their decision about what side they're on. The question is now, the decision remaining for a lot of people is, am I actually going to sit down and go through filling out 4 pages of ballot bubbles to fill in
2 pages,
and send it in? Well, 4 pages if you count all the sides. Yeah, I almost forgot one, believe it or not, and I'm thinking, wait, where did I miss? Oh yeah, and I filled out my ballot yesterday and sent it in, and I realized I'd only done 3 of the 4 pages.
Yeah. Oh, wow. No, we had an email from a reader who was like, I don't have one of the propositions on my ballot that you say is on there. Maybe something's wrong. And then she emailed back and was like, there's so many pages, I missed one. Yeah.
Well, let's spend a couple of minutes as we wrap up. What happened in Pima County? There were certain ballots arriving late. Alisa, can you give us a little background on this? I mean, there were just 500 ballots or so, but the way there are so many people out there that are questioning, wait a second, does this mean there's something going on with our elections? So there was some issue with...
Yeah, and I think Tim wrote a lengthier look at this, but, you know, my understanding is an issue that went back to the elections department in Pima County, a mapping issue with these adjacent districts that got the right, that were in the right taxing district, but not the right voting district. They were right next to each other, and they're still kind of sussing out what happened. Tim kind of did a good breakdown of that. Yeah. But you know, it really it sounds like it's supposed to take a couple of days to get all these ballots out, and it took a little longer. I received my ballot on Tuesday. And so, you know, and then with the holiday, it was a little bit backed up as well. So I think you're right. It did cause a little bit of pause, and the elections department and the recorder's office kind of gave it a little explanation.
Tim, before I have you explain it, though, but I have to go Mr. Tinfoil Hat. That's the reason why I wanted to bring up the topic. Only time for your ballots, but there might be people out there thinking, oh, there's another conspiracy.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be, and we'll hear about it at the next Board of Supervisors meeting, I'm sure, at least during the call to the public. People will say this is more evidence that our election system is broken and needs to be fixed. But the point is, the recorder's office was transparent about it. It was only 500. It was quickly fixed, and the ballots were sent out. And the remaining question, unless I missed something, is how long this mistake has been on the books. We don't know that. We don't know who made the original mistake. But it was fixed quickly and transparently.
I can only give you about 30 seconds, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it is concerning that this happened at such a late time. However, the delays. And a lot of people were delayed in receiving their ballots, but like mine came, a couple days ago. It's in the end, I think not that big a deal.
Well, but again, it shouldn't be that big a deal, but it might be to some people.
It adds up, right? Like it's a lot of a little trickle of little issues when there's already this big kind of looming election trust issue. I think these little things just add up for people who are already thinking that maybe there are trust issues. So yeah,
and another great argument for getting rid of Columbus Day.
All right, thanks very much to our panel: Steve Jess of AZPM, Irene McKisson of AZLuminaria, Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star, Alisa Reznick of KJZZ Radio. Thanks so much for the great discussion, all of you. And thank you very much for joining us this week on The Press Room. I'm Steve Goldstein.